Hello, and welcome to Boring Backdrops Be Gone, animating backdrops with code. I'm Marin, aka Algorithmer, on the Scratch team. I'm a Scratch Learning Resource Designer, and I'll be your session facilitator today. A copy of the slides I'm sharing in this session are available on our website in our Learning Library, where you'll also find many of the resources I'll link to today. This is the second in our series of 6 sessions on leveling up with Scratch. Each session focuses on a different topic, and my goal with each session is to provide you with a variety of ways to approach creative projects on each of the 6 topics. The Scratch Foundation is grateful to AT&T for its support of this workshop series. We have partnered with the Achievery from AT&T to provide free beginner and intermediate creative coding lesson plans on a variety of topics for educators, caregivers, and learners. I'll share some of those resources throughout the session today. To code along with me today, you can go to scratch.mit.edu and click Create, or log into your free Scratch account to save projects. For anyone new to Scratch, we have Getting Started resources on our platform and in our Learning Library with lots of helpful information. But a few quick basics. The Scratch Project Editor screen is where you'll create projects in Scratch. If you aren't already on this Project Editor screen, click the See Inside button, which is available on all projects. Any character or object you can code is called a sprite. To code projects in Scratch, start by dragging out a block from the block palette to the script area. You can click the block to try it. Then snap another block to it to build your script. If you chose when the green flag is clicked to run the code, click the green flag above the stage. You can choose your preferred language or color mode, original or high contrast, under Settings, and see our tutorials or debug buttons for helpful tips when creating projects. When logged in, you'll also have access to Remix projects, which is making a copy of someone else's shared project to modify. I highlight some remix opportunities in this series. Or share a project that you created inspired by this series, using the Share button to make your project public. We have a lot to talk about today, but I do want to share one slide to ground us in Scratch's creative learning philosophy. And for those newer to our workshops and creative learning materials, I encourage you to check out our Scratch Creative Learning Philosophy resource in the Learning Library on our website. As facilitators, we want to support playful learning and tinkering mindset values so that participants can engage playfully in projects that are meaningful to them and elicit joy, collaborate with peers to experiment, share, and celebrate ideas, allowing for multiple pathways of engagement to foster a wide diversity of projects and supporting different experience levels. We want to help them develop a mindset that is comfortable with the discomfort of getting stuck, making room for risk and iteration, as well as develop a mindset that thinks critically about strategies for getting unstuck, saving space for the process to start again, and help them imagine what's next. We often call this productive struggle. And this applies to you too. Remember that we are learners just as much as our learners. So, as we explore today, give yourself space and grace, and remember it's okay to get stuck or feel uncomfortable. You don't have to have all the answers right away, just a curious mind and an excitement to try new things. That is part of the process and how we develop and model a growth mindset for our learners. Today, specifically, we're going to focus on experimenting with different ways of creating backdrops and backgrounds, understand the kind of limits and benefits of different types of graphics that you can use. Think about iterating on different solutions to code effects and scene changes to bring those static backdrops to life, and explore some interactive backgrounds that engage the user. As always, we encourage you to remix starter projects to add your own personalization and touches, and reflect on your practice. Reflect on, how the process went. Have that growth mindset as we debug and problem solve, and ideally also, share what you have created with the Scratch Learning community. I'm going to use the term backdrops and backgrounds pretty interchangeably here in this session today. So, just to kind of level set us with some terminology, technically, in the Scratch application, you will see there's a section that says backdrops. But when I say backgrounds, I'm really talking about us setting the scene around our characters, which we call sprites in Scratch. I want us to take a moment at the beginning here to imagine a new world. So, what would exist there? What is the vantage point? Are you looking at it from above? Is it top down? Are you looking at it from a side view? Think about kind of the scene that you are imagining. One of the things that we have created is a Scratch design journal that is great. You can use it to help students imagine, plan, and iterate through all the different phases of their project. So this is what it looks like in case you were curious. It can be printed and filled out by hand, or you could fill it out digitally. And what I love about this is it's a great place to record your brainstorming ideas and your sketches. So, your thoughts about the world that you are imagining. We're going to start by creating our own backdrop in the Scratch Paint Editor to represent this world. But don't worry if you feel you are not the world's greatest artist. I am going to share some tips and tricks in the coming slides. I just want us to familiarize ourselves with the tools and do our best to create something. We have 2 units on the Achievery if you are interested in kind of some more drawing tips and tricks that would be really also great to check out. The How to Draw Backdrops in Scratch and Backdrop Design Achievery units. And they have videos full of the tips and tricks. But for now, I just want us to dive in and try some tools. One of the other resources that we have available is our sprite creation coding cards. I'll link to these in the slideshow. This will be in our Scratch Learning Library. And it's a great tool to print out and share with students. These are student facing, but you can also use them. And we have a lot of tips about what the various tools are in this paint editor that I would love for you to try. So when we are in Scratch, we will enter into a project, and the first thing you'll be in is your sprite. But if you click over here under Stage in the Backdrops area, that is where we're going to start. And we're going to click on Stage Backdrops and this Backdrops tab. And then you have here what we call the Paint Editor. And this is where we can start creating something. Now, there are 2 main modes for drawing in Scratch. There is vector mode that allows you to create and edit shapes. This is the Scratch default. And then there is the bitmap mode, which allows you to edit photos and paint with pixels. If you are creating your own sprites or backdrops, like we're going to practice today, I would highly recommend that you stay in that default vector mode to create your artwork, because vector mode allows users to adjust colors, change the shape of an object in the costume, add or remove elements. And this flexibility is really important if you or another Scratcher wants to remix, make a copy, and adjust this art for their own project later. So to start, we're on that tab, and I'm just going to suggest you try something like using the rectangle tool here, maybe to create a couple of rectangles of different colors, maybe the sky and the ground, or walls and floor, or ground and the path if you're going with a top-down view. You could add a small object using the circle or rectangle tool, like a rock or a plant. And you can set the colors and use the reshape tool to adjust the points on the shape. So I'm going to take my rectangle here, and I'm going to go to my fill and just choose kind of a blue sky. If I don't want this outline on it, I could always remove it by saying no outline, or removing the color of the outline. Maybe now I'm going to make another one, and it's going to be kind of ground. So I'm just going to try to find a brownish color here. And notice I'd accidentally had my rectangle selected, so it was changing this color. Not what I meant to do. So instead, I'm going to create a second rectangle by clicking on that rectangle tool again. And now I'll adjust that color to be more of the ground. So pretty simple backdrop here that we've started with. Maybe I want a gray rock. I'm going to take my circle tool and kind of find a gray color here and just drag to make this very gigantic rock at the moment. There's a couple other tools that we could use here. For instance, this reshape tool, I can use to drag these points on this vector object around in order to change the shape of my rock here. It's kind of an interesting flat on top. So maybe I'm going to use this rotate tool, my select and then rotate here to flip that rock upside down. So I've got something going here. I could also use the paintbrush. Maybe I'm going to freehand. Always dangerous when I start freehanding things. Freehand a little plant here. So there's my there's my plant. I'm not the world's greatest artist. That's okay. It's just a fun way to sort of start, experiment with the tools, get comfortable with them, and see what you can create. There are a couple tricks about the tools that I love to share. There's a couple of things that you can do that you may not know that you can do. So one of those things is that you can actually remove the interior of shapes with this eraser tool, and it makes a custom path. So you could use that reshape tool to then adjust that custom path to be a different shape, maybe remove the points, maybe use the fill to then create something inside that custom shape, like add a gradient or something. And you can see that as I'm sort of playing around here, I'm adjusting the outline on the original shape. Now that new shape that I've created becomes its own thing that I can manipulate. Once I paint a line, I could then choose to fill it in with a gradient color. I can even do things like remove the points of a shape. So here, when it's filled and I delete part of it, it kind of just scoops out the part that I didn't want. But if there's no fill and I delete parts of the lines, it actually removes the whole part of the line. So now I have this square that I started with now one open side. So the tools here are minimal. There aren't a ton of them, but what you can do with them is pretty diverse. And so I encourage you to sort of play around with these tools as you are experimenting, exploring, and see what kinds of things that you can create just using these simple tools. Now, we've talked about how I am not the greatest artist, but one thing that I love to do is, since I am somewhat intimidated sometimes by drawing, is really mix and match and edit the desired pieces of maybe other vector sprites that folks have created in our sprite and backdrop library. And then I could add missing elements, recolor, reshape, and create something brand new out of pieces of other things. So in this image, you'll see I've combined the elements from the witch house. So I have the walls and the window with the volcano from the Jurassic background, the trees from woods. And then I use the tools to remove, recolor, resize, and reshape these elements. So I've taken things that others have created and made a unique creation of my own using these pieces. And because these were vector backgrounds, so they were made up of these individual shapes that can be edited so easily, I was able to do this quite easily. One thing that I always have fun doing is I had a little remix tree going at one point with some scratchers where I said, here's a sprite that I've cobbled together from parts of other sprites. Can you figure out what sprites I used? And then what kind of remixed sprite could you create? And so I've shared a few of them here because it's a really fun and sort of goofy way of being able to explore the tools, including for those who may not feel comfortable maybe drawing from a blank page, right? That can be a little intimidating. So try remixing, grab pieces from other sprites, throw them together, and create this new thing. For those who may have been around Scratch a ton, perhaps some of these parts will look familiar to you. See if you can identify what parts are unique, what parts are sort of new to you, and it's such goofy fun. So definitely something I encourage, and you can use that for the backdrop or for the sprites. There are sort of a limited number of vector sprites in the backdrops selection. So when you're in the backdrops menu, as you kind of scroll through, you'll have to do a little searching. For instance, here, this Jurassic background, I know that it's a vector background because there's this button down here that says convert to bitmap. So that's sort of my first clue. And then my next clue is that I can use my selector tool and actually select pieces and move them around, use the reshape to change the size and the color. So those are great. Other backdrops, however, like this one that's more of a photograph, you'll notice this says convert to vector on the bottom. That's because this is an image, it's a bitmap. So I can't quite as easily edit this one, but I do still have some tools I can use. Like I could use the eraser tool to remove the tree. Now, what I fill in there is then another matter. Here, I've just filled it with some yellow, kind of sun-like, right? So something to keep in mind as you are working with these tools. But lots of scratchers have created their own awesome vector backgrounds or vector sprites, and you can always use those and cobble them together. You'll notice I'm talking about using parts of sprites. So, for example, if I'm down here in the sprite menu, I could actually choose something from here. Let's go with I know that there's a star in here. So let's go with, oh, here, let's take the sun. So I might choose this sun costume. And what I can actually do is use the selector tool to grab this costume, copy it, go back to my backdrop, and paste it in. And there I've used a sprite costume, but I've added it to my backdrop. And then I can just remove the sprite here. Don't need that anymore. So that's one way that you can also use various vector elements from the different libraries together. Another way that you can create is to import images. So, say that you've got drawings, other drawing programs at your disposal, like Illustrator, Vector Ink, Pixel Art, just to name a few. Where you can create ideally SVGs, which are vector images that you could import here into Scratch. You could also use PNGs, photos of things that you can import here into Scratch. And then you can utilize those in your backgrounds. Other drawing tools may be more feature rich. So if our current paint editor doesn't have as much control over the gradient that you need, maybe you create another drawing program and you bring that SVG in. It's pretty simple. All you need to do is go into your backdrops costumes area here, and you'll notice there's an option to upload a backdrop. So from there, I could upload something like this SVG that I created of the school. I recreated it in a different program. And now I have these pieces that I could recolor, move around, and change in order to create this backdrop. Or my daughter recently drew a painting of a city, so I could import that. Once it's here, I can convert that to a vector, which just helps me more easily sort of move it around and resize it here in the paint editor. And now I've got this really fun background that I can use in my project that's very personal and unique. One of the things that I have linked to here you'll see I've got two types of I've got the background that was a drawing, and I also imported in one of her drawings of a mouse on a motorcycle and animated that using Scratch. So this is completely her own creations brought in here to into Scratch. Or here, another one of my daughters made this kind of painting of the night sky, and I've animated over that with a shooting star, and then another drawing she made of me as a superhero, which was very sweet. So just some ways that I can utilize some really unique elements in Scratch in order to create something very personal, and also maybe working in that medium, working, drawing by hand is easier than drawing digitally with a mouse or tools, and so it's a way that they can still participate in Scratch and bring their drawings to life in a different way, but maybe start off in a medium that's more comfortable for them. One of the things about our backdrops that's a lot of fun is that we can actually bring them to life and animate them then with code. So if you've clicked on the backdrops area on the stage, you may have noticed that backdrops don't have motion blocks, but they do have looks blocks. And so you could use these looks blocks to say, change a scene. In this case, you've seen an example of a project I have here where some keyboard keys or mouse clicks or a broadcast, maybe from another sprite, could trigger a backdrop change. You could also use the ask block to trigger those changes. For example, in this one, I've said, do you want to go to the basketball court or to the soccer field? And so when they give me their response, then that triggers a certain backdrop to come up, and it also triggers my sprite here to change its costume. And so that answers inside of a conditional statement, an if-then block. And this is, leveling up a little bit, but it's a way to give the person who is interacting with your project control over what's happening in the scene, kind of a choose your own adventure sort of an option. So it's a fun way to bring your user in. And it's also a nice challenge for your coders as they have now a couple of backdrops to try. Let's think about the different ways that we can trigger them to appear. Do you want them to click, left or right arrows? Do you want them to click somewhere like a button on the screen in order to send a message to change the backdrop? Lots of different ways that you can interact with this. I also will note that there's one thing I'm doing here, which you'll see I'm repeating the question if I don't get one of the two expected answers that I want. I love to build in these sort of debugging opportunities when I'm working on projects. So if I didn't have that there, they could type anything in, the number 8, a semicolon, football stadium, whatever they want to type in. I guess I should clarify American football or football elsewhere in the world, right? Because we do have soccer here. But I'm giving them sort of very two distinct options. But if I don't have that repeat, then what happens? This is a debugging opportunity. If they give me an unexpected answer, how do I account for that? And so I just want to highlight that as another way of kind of leveling up is talking about how you can make sure you're getting the answers you want. And spoiler alert, we'll be talking more about conditional statements in the next session. Come back and join me for that, where we'll go way more into depth on this. So here's another really fun way that I love to interact with projects. In the last example, the backdrop, I don't know if you noticed, it kind of faded in and out as it changed. And so that's one of the effects that are available under those looks blocks that you can use to make the background more dynamic. So one of the things that you could do as well is use different effects to set the mood of the scene. In this one, you're seeing it's kind of changing from light to dark, and the character is also adjusting as this project goes on. This is using the brightness effect that's under the looks block. What I'm going to do is use this is optional, but just kind of a fun option. If you're not familiar with the microbit, I have a microbit here. It has a tilt sensor and that you can use in order to, and buttons that you could use to trigger action that happens in your Scratch project. I also have here a vernier go force accelerometer, and it also has a tilt mechanism in it. So there's a few different extensions that we have that you can connect with your Scratch project in order to be able to trigger things to happen on the screen. I go over to the microbit screen. I'm just going to connect my microbit here. And now that's connected, you can see the tilt angle is what's driving this project. So as I tilt my microbit, if you can see what I'm doing on the screen back and forth, it's sort of lightening and darkening the screen based on the amount of tilt that it's reading. And then once it gets to a certain point, it actually triggers some sound. I don't know if you can hear the sound, but it triggers some sound and a costume change and a little word change on the screen. Uh, so it's just a neat way to just experiment with different elements combined together in order to make this project come to life. Another thing that we can do is parallax, right? Many of you may have heard of parallax. If you haven't, I'm sure any scratcher in your life love to tell you about parallax. It is hugely popular in the scratch community, and it's a really neat way of being able to, again, give the user control over the scene. This is following your mouse movement in order to kind of set how different layers of the scene are set against each other. Now, I mentioned earlier that backdrops on the stage don't have motion blocks. So, since they don't have motion blocks, what we've actually done here is not technically set this as a backdrop under that stage area. We've created sprites that are, background elements. And so, with those sprites, then we have access to these motion blocks. So it's still I'm gonna still count this as a backdrop, even if it's not under that stage backdrops area, because you are still setting a scene. It's still a big scenery piece that we are controlling here. We've just set them up as, in this case, you can see a couple different sprites. And so with this simple bit of code using the mouse position to guide us, it is allowing us to adjust the scene and move it around. And then you can do things like, if you click on a certain sprite, maybe it changes the background, or maybe when you click on the character, it changes the sprite. And so again, you can make it more interactive, different, maybe trigger some sounds or some other things that you can utilize. You can also have a static backdrop and just have bits in front of it. But this is also a really neat time to sort of think about things like layering elements. And so layers become very important. And thinking about perspective. Maybe this is a cross-curricular opportunity with a art teacher to talk about perspective. So the items that are in the background might be smaller than the items in the foreground, and giving us that sense of perspective. Another thing that scratchers love to do is create these scrolling backdrops. So I have a couple of different iterations of this that we will talk about here in order to be able to create scrolling backdrops. So one of those is this backdrop is moving and scrolling by a sprite character. Again, because we're having this movement element, we're going to need to create these backdrops as a sprite so we can get to those move blocks. But once we've created these elements as a sprite, now in these two projects, what you're seeing here is that you have two background sprites sort of following each other. And so they follow each other across the stage, making this seamless image. You'll see in the one of the visuals here, I've actually darkened one of the backdrops just so you can kind of see where they align, where they butt up against each other. Each backdrop sprite can have multiple costumes. So as these are scrolling by on the screen and then sort of resetting back to the right side of the screen, maybe going left or left to right, we can actually have a couple of costumes here so that it'll be different each time. Maybe some costumes have elements like a plant on it. One of them has a rock. Maybe one of them has a cloud. Whatever it is that you want to add to these, and that costume being chosen at random really creates a variety, so you never know what's coming next, and makes that background feel really dynamic. In our Achiever unit, Scrolling Background, we have a really nice step-by-step guide about how to create one of these. Another method is also shown in the moving background in the Backdrop Design Achiever unit and in our Make It Fly in Editor tutorial. So if I go to the Make It Fly example, here you'll see there's an interactive tutorial that will walk you through how to create the characters, and then how to have the character move with arrow keys. And then, maybe it's collecting objects or other things. This is one of our starter projects that you can find on our starter projects page. But in this example, if we see inside, you'll see that I have now followed that tutorial to set up the cat to use the arrows in order to fly around. And then with up and down. And then the buildings are scrolling behind, and it's creating a sort of background for us, but it feels like the cat is flying because these background elements are moving. Again, they're set up as a sprite so that I can access these movement blocks, but I still consider this a dynamic background because these aren't necessarily the focus. Maybe the cat is flying around collecting things or interacting with sprites to score points, and that is the focus of the project. But having these buildings moving in the background instead of just a blue background gives this project more life, more vitality, more interest. And so that is what we are kind of working toward here with this scrolling background. Again, layer order is very important in this case. So sprites can be set via the looks blocks to be in the background or forward. So as I zoom in on this code, you'll notice, for instance, the backdrops, the buildings are all set to go to the back layer so they don't accidentally overlap with the cat. That also makes sure that we kind of keep that sense of perspective, that some things are in the background and some things are in the foreground. And then here it's just cycling through each costume in order, but I could use some blocks like switch costume, and then the operator pick random. And then I could say, okay, I have 7 costumes here. Pick a random one to switch to each time this program runs. And so now when I run this code, it's going to be a little more dynamic and interesting because I don't know what building's going to show up next, right? So it gives it a little bit more interest and life. Maybe the building could change color or something as it's coming along. So here, as this blue building exits the screen, you'll notice the next one's sort of changed color. And then as we get to the next building, it's changed color again. So again, we're just sort of layering on some effects and some interest to keep this being a really dynamic and interesting program for the user to engage with. Now, another way that you can level this up, so that was sort of level 1. A lot of the things I'll be talking about could span across grade levels, depending on, of course, their experience with Scratch and coding. So it's always a little hard to give an age band on some of these things based on experience. But I would say that first Make It Fly tutorial is great for those lower grades and for those beginners getting started in Scratch, because there's that interactive tutorial that really walks them through the steps. There's a starter project they can use to begin some of this. And it's a great sort of baseline. So maybe your 3 to 5 grades, depending on their experience. But if then you want to sort of kick it up a notch, if you have a kid in your class that has more experience with Scratch, that wants a little bit more of a challenge, this way of leveling up your scroll is maybe the next step up. So maybe this could be upper grades, or maybe this could just be a kid who has more experience in Scratch. This version of the infinite scroll is actually using clones and some math. So you see how we're sort of adding some complexity here. What we are doing is we're, again, creating a layered scene. In this case, we have, I have something like 6 costumes here. And what it is doing is using that same concept of kind of having parts follow each other. In this case, it's creating 2 clones. One here centered on the stage, the next one set to follow it on the stage. And they're sort of constantly following each other. And as one sort of reaches the edge, it goes back and starts over again. And they just keep sort of flipping as they go across the stage. But it gives it this feeling of constant scroll, this infinite scroll. I've used some math here to say, okay, if I have 6 costumes here that I'm using for this project, I want you to make clones of each of these 6 costumes. That's the first thing I want you to do. Then I want you to scroll them, but I'm not having it move at a consistent rate because I'm trying to establish that real life sense of objects that are closer to you move faster and objects that are farther from you may move at a slower rate of speed to our eyes. And so I'm trying to add that element of realism. But as you can see in my infinite scroll costume here, I have, or sprite here, I have the pavement, the flowers, the buildings, the clouds, and the mountains in the background. So in my code here, first I'm having it repeat through all the costumes in this set, make a clone of yourself. So I have 2 copies essentially of each of these costume drawings, and they follow each other. One's centered on the screen, and one's all the way off to the right side of the stage. Then those clones are set to change X. So move along the X axis at a certain pace. In this case, by -5, I'm moving from right to left. But if I just had it move by -5, I'm going to take that calculation out for a second. When I run this, you'll see everything's moving at the same speed. But that's not necessarily totally realistic to how it might happen in real life. So you'll see, if I can get rid of this comment here, but that'll be in there in the project if you want to come back to this. If I change this to actually divide how much it's moving by the costume number, then since this costume is in the farthest spot and it's number 6, that means that this will move by a slower pace. It'll move by less of an increment because it's dividing this by 6. Versus the costume in the front, the road, is costume number 1. So it's dividing this -5 by 1, which means it's moving at a faster pace than the mountains in the back. And now you see, hopefully as you watch them sort of against each other, the effect that this is a more realistic effect to what we might see in real life. And it's also just, I don't know, very satisfying. And then I've added in some additional elements, like if I click on the character or the bike or the wheels, I can sort of change different things about this little rider that I can have happen, and maybe some horns beep or some music plays. And so this is a really fun way of creating this scrolling background. Um, One of the things that I love that I will often mention later, but the idea of having folks work in tandem when you're leveling up. Some kids, may be really ready for this, and some kids may be really intimidated by this. And so, what about pair programming? Combining some students that are more comfortable maybe with the coding process with some students that really love drawing. And so maybe together, one of these students kind of works on the scrolling motion, the coding behind the scrolling, and the other student works on creating these little elements, the different antenna, the different way that the wheels look, the different way that the characters look. And so together they've created this really dynamic project that plays on both of their strengths, and they've created something greater with the 2 of them together than they could have created separately. So it's not necessarily that one person has to do all the things here. It's a really great opportunity to help them learn from each other and sort of coordinate on a project. And so that's something I would also encourage as you're thinking about these leveling up opportunities is how can you work as a class, or how can you work as small groups to also work on challenging ourselves to come up with some of these more challenging concepts, right? We're having this growth mindset. Another way that we can level up is this more advanced scrolling version that, again, uses a similar concept. When you look closely at these 3 scrolling methods that I've showed you, the make it fly one with the buildings, this one here with the infinite scroll, and now this one that's controlled by the user, the concepts are somewhat overlapping in that you've got these background sprites that are sort of butted up against each other, and they're following each other in order to create this feeling of motion. In the first one, the motion, or excuse me, in the first 2 examples, the motion was controlled by the program. The user had no control over it. It was being done for them. In this version, I can actually use the keyboard keys to move a character across my screen here. And as I am walking them, then the background is changing at the same rate that they are walking or strolling. So it's a different way of approaching a sort of infinite scrolling background. And this version is from the side view. But if I go back here, this is a top down version. So there's lots of different ways, again, that you can approach this. One thing I love about this is it really brings in sort of what is the world that you are envisioning? And then how can these techniques be used in order to create your idea? So not everybody's going to end up with the same program in the end. Everybody's going to sort of have their own unique take on it, but they're all working on a similar concept as they're working through these things. One of the things that is great is in our learning library, I actually have a whole video and a set of coding cards that you can give to students, all about this particular way of creating a scrolling background. So I'm not going to go too into the weeds in it today because I do have those additional resources to attack this particular version of the scrolling background. But I wanted to highlight it here for you so that you could see that there are many different approaches to this concept. And again, this is using these background pieces as sprites so that we can harness the power of those movement blocks. But it's really making the scene become something dynamic and part of it. And so I still consider this a non boring backdrop because even if it is technically set up as a sprite, it's this big set piece, right? That we are bringing in and making a part of our story. And just this diagram here is just kind of showing you what I show you in the cards in the video, but how they're all, using some math stacked up back to back to back so that as you move forward and backward, they're sort of all scrolling at the same rate together. We're using variable in these in order to create this background that scrolls all at the same rate together. And in this version, the user is able to control that scroll with using those left and right arrow keys and using this main sprite to sort of navigate through this world. Just another version of that is platformers. We're going to talk about games in a future session. So again, I'm not going to dive too deep into this at the moment, but platformers are another way that these scrolling backgrounds are often utilized in Scratch because students love to create these. And so here we are setting up the scene that they are scrolling through in this platform. It becomes another part of the character of the scene. And then they can think about things like, what sprites do you want to add to interact with? Do you want to do it top down or from the side? What kinds of stories may go into this? As we're starting to wrap up here, I did also want to kind of backtrack slightly just for a second to talk about, I mentioned clones a number of times while we were having the session today, but you can actually use clones in order to create a background that is unique each time that you run it. This is another way that I love to kind of set a scene. In this particular case, the scene that I am setting is using these tiles in this example project. I've created a set of tiles inspired by pixel art, which is also a favorite of Scratchers. And what I've done is created a program here where the program decides which tile chosen at random to stamp or to clone onto the stage, depending on how you want to code it. It can change the direction based on one of 4 directions it could choose from. So again, kind of keeping it dynamic and interesting. And then it's just a floor pattern that's underneath my characters that are walking around, hanging out. I've got them here. If I run the program, you can see it just lays out all those tiles, and then the program's just these people walking over my tile pattern. But in this case, I can trigger a new tile pattern by pressing the space key, and you'll see that every time that I press that space key, I get a new floor design because it's picking these tiles at random, and then it is also choosing from the 4 directions I've allowed it to turn, basically 90 degrees each time in order to create something new each time. I could add little fun things like have it change color. And so as I add those blocks, Now my tile floor is becoming very festive. But again, it's just a really fun way of taking something fairly simple, right? I'm just creating these pixel art tiles, and I'm just making copies, butting them up against each other, but I'm creating this really dynamic and interesting floor background. I've had to set these tiles up again as a sprite because I need access to the clone blocks and other things, but it allows me to create this scene, set this background scene on my project. And again, this is a really nice opportunity to maybe pair up those students who love art. So they might want to create the tiles with a student who's really interested in the coding piece. And so they're coding and figuring out how to get them to lay out on the screen. So it's another opportunity to really work together in order to create something really dynamic if you have a group of sort of mixed experience levels in your classroom. As we close out our session today, let's look at Scratch's creative learning spiral. We have imagined, created, and played. So now it's time to share and reflect and iterate. Imagine again. We want to celebrate a culture of getting unstuck and celebrate what was learned from missteps. For those new to Scratch, it can be helpful to get stuck and experiment a bit with blocks before you, as the facilitator, share tips and tricks. It can be powerful to model getting stuck and showing that it's okay to not have all the answers. That productive struggle is really valuable. And debugging and iterating alongside your learners makes you an active participant as well, as everyone learns through play and tinkering. You can find our debugging resources in our learning library for more. As we think about creating, iterating on our work, or debugging, keep in mind that pair programming can be valuable, especially when you have groups of different experience levels or interests. Pair programming is a practice where two developers collaborate, sharing a keyboard and mouse to work on the same task or project. One person is the driver who creates the code, while the other is the navigator who reviews, guides, and thinks strategically. Roles are then switched frequently to balance tasks and share knowledge. Together, the pair can create rich and dynamic projects, while they have opportunities to teach and learn from each other and explore different solutions. The pairs could divide up the tasks in a project. A student interested in art might create sprites, or a student interested in music or Foley might create sounds or musical scores, while another focuses on coding. Or students could pair up at specific moments to debug or add additional elements together. If you have a Scratch account, your project will save automatically. If you don't have a Scratch account yet, you can save your project to your computer. Click File and then choose Save to your computer. Next time you want to work on your project, go to scratch.mit.edu and click Create. Then click File and choose Load from your computer to upload your project. If you have a Scratch account, you can share your project and add it to Studios. Click the orange Share button to share your project to the Scratch community. Click the See Project Page button on the project editor to go to the project page. This is where you can add instructions and notes about your project. Now, other Scratchers can see and interact with your project. We promote many pathways, many solutions, because often there is not one right way to create your project. Some projects may reach a higher ceiling and have more complexity, while others can show how you have stretched to widen the walls of what's possible. We encourage learners to have fun tinkering, work with their peers, and design something to showcase their passion, and then proudly share their project when they finish. You can see our reflection and sharing resources in our learning library for more. Speaking of reflection, learners can reflect on their project creation and process as they complete a show and tell sharing sheet, or project gallery walk, self reflection, and peer feedback sheet, which can be found in our learning library. Their peers are encouraged to leave feedback or comments on the sheet for the creator as they view the projects in a studio or participate in a gallery walk. Just note that learners need a Scratch account and access to the online editor to participate in studios. In addition to the resources shared throughout these slides, I've shared here some additional resources where you can find help, inspiration, and information. Dive into our learning library for a wealth of materials that continues to grow. I've mentioned resources on the Achievery during today's session. The Achievery platform connects K 12 students to a new world of digital learning. And the Scratch Foundation is partnered with the Achievery to provide free beginner and intermediate creative coding lesson plans on a variety of topics for educators, caregivers, and learners. On the platform, there are project guides and accompanying videos that support the exploration of Scratch. Lessons are perfect for those who may want more guidance or scaffolds to start. And Scratch units cover a variety of topics, so students can take the skills they learn and create projects about things that relate to their passions and interests, while engaging in playful exploration. You can sign up to access for free on their website. Thank you for exploring this webinar and our resources today. I hope today's session has sparked ideas and will inspire your own unique projects that speak to your passions and interests.